It's a meeting reminiscent of the Cold War era. NATO and Russia talked in Brussels, with relations said to be at a critically low level. So exactly what does each side actually want? Is an armed conflict now likely, or does diplomacy still have a chance? This is Inside Story.
Al Jazeera. Three hours ago.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Peter Dobby. A high-stakes meeting between Russia and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, over Ukraine ended without a breakthrough. Politicians and military men from both sides said significant differences remained during what they described as frank and open discussions. More talks are underway, but failing to reach an understanding means the risk of armed conflict in Europe is very real. The US and NATO have been increasingly concerned about a Russian military build-up near the border with Ukraine. The arrival of more than 100,000 soldiers and tanks, artillery and long-range rocket units prompted fears about a ground invasion. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly denied that, while also warning NATO against expanding near its border. Both NATO and the US rejected the Kremlin's demands on security, among them a guarantee that NATO will not accept Ukraine and other former Soviet nations as members.
This crisis is a making of Russia, and therefore it is important that they de-escalate. Ukraine has the right to self-defense. That's enshrined in the UN founding charter, and of course some NATO allies and NATO help them to uphold that right to self-defense.
Together, the United States and our NATO allies made clear we will not slam the door shut on NATO's open door policy, a policy that has always been central to the NATO alliance. If Russia walks away, however, it will be quite apparent they were never serious about pursuing diplomacy at all. That is why collectively we are preparing for every eventuality.
Russia's deputy foreign minister said NATO's position is unacceptable for Moscow.
If NATO opts for the policy of deterring Russia, we will respond with measures of counter-deterrence. If it uses the policy of intimidation, we will respond with counter-intimidation. If it looks for vulnerabilities in the Russian defense system, we will look for NATO's vulnerabilities. It's not our choice, but we don't have other options if we don't overturn this current very dangerous course of events.
The tensions between NATO and Moscow can be traced to the Crimean Peninsula, where Russia has one of its most important naval bases. In 2014, Ukraine's pro-Russian government was toppled following months of protests. Russia responded by seizing control of Crimea. Pro-Russian separatists then declared independence in Donetsk and Luhansk after a referendum was held. That triggered a conflict between Ukraine and the separatists. Despite a ceasefire agreed in Minsk, sporadic fighting has never really stopped. In 2016, NATO deployed battle groups to Baltic states and Poland in response to the annexation of Crimea. The latest tension started last year when Russia mobilized 100,000 soldiers near its border with Ukraine. Okay, there we are. Here we go. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Brussels, we have Teresa Fallon, Director of the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. In Moscow, we have Pavel Felgenhauer. He's a defense and military analyst. And in Oslo, we have Glenn Deason. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway. Welcome to you all. Teresa, coming to you first. Is this a moment of truth in the relationship between Russia and NATO?
I think there's a giant sigh of relief that the meeting actually took place, because Russia, there was rumors that they might not even have the meeting with NATO if the meeting in Geneva with the US didn't go so well. So it's a promising sign that they actually had the meeting. It's the first time they've done it in 2 years, and the meeting lasted longer than anticipated by an extra hour. But there are two problems now. We have the problem of Ukraine. Tensions are extremely high, and it's clear, according to Wendy Sherman in her press conference yesterday, that NATO is not willing to shut the door. They're going to maintain their open door policy, and it's up to countries if they really want to apply to NATO that they're leaving the door open. And this is something that President Putin has been clear that he wants a treaty outlining that neither Ukraine nor Georgia could ever join NATO. So this is something I don't know how they're going to get around. So this is kind of an intractable point right now. And many analysts have wondered, did Putin make these maximalist requests to see how much he would get in return? So this is, everyone's unclear about what Putin is doing. We had followed, if his demands include all the countries that joined NATO post-1997 would have to leave. And so in many respects, what he is doing by surrounding Ukraine with 100,000 soldiers, some haven't seen that as blackmail, trying to get negotiations, but others in Russia feel that finally we're being heard. So it remains to be seen. But the other issue is that, is Putin miscalculating? Because in many respects, he is creating a backlash. We've seen Sweden and Finland signal that they, instead of leaving NATO, that right now that they're considering joining NATO. So instead of decreasing the size of the amount of countries in NATO, Putin inadvertently is actually perhaps could be increasing the size of NATO.
Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow, is there a chance that perhaps the feeling in the Kremlin, i.e. Mr. Putin's settled position on this, is why should NATO be allowed to cherry pick from our list of demands?
Well, that is the official position that Russia has been telling before these meetings, during these meetings, and also after the meetings, that these Russian demands should be accepted or else. So now we're most likely moving into the or else time frame. Of course, today there's a meeting in Vienna, OSCE, discussing the same thing. It's obvious there won't be any breakthrough there because that's not the forum where you can achieve any kind of compromise or agreement on anything much, at least not in one day. So too many nations there represented, you need unanimity to get anything. So today the Russian main negotiator, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, said that maybe we right now won't be even planning any new meetings with America or with NATO or with the West. We'll be considering our countermeasures, which will be military or military technical in nature. That means Russia will be planning military responses to the rejection by the West of Russian demands. Ryabkov said maybe we'll be deploying Russian military infrastructure to Venezuela and Cuba. But he said that's kind of maybe yes, maybe not. That's just sort of one of the options.
Okay.
So right now Russia will be considering options on the military technical response.
Glenn Deason in Oslo, the US, for the United States, for Mr. Blinken, clearly the idea of either a bilateral or a unilateral deal, self-standing, self-supporting over Ukraine, was toxic. It was someplace the US didn't want to go. Was that the best attitude and the best approach to have ahead of the NATO meeting?
No, I think there will have to be some kind of flexibility because the reason why we have this standoff is because we really need a solution to what is the pan-European security architecture. We initially had a lot of deals on this topic. I mean, in the early 90s, in 1990, 94, and 99, we had all these agreements on pan-European security where all sides agreed on the principle of indivisible security. So one side should not expand their security at the expense of the other. But what Blinken is reflecting is this new argument by NATO, which was that the real principle of European security should be the right of NATO to expand. And this is the main problem because these two principles, they do not harmonize. So this is kind of why we have this conflict. The US insists on the right of NATO to expand, and Russia insists it will not permit NATO to expand anymore. So this idea that not giving an inch to Russia is a diplomatic victory to stand up to the Russians, it doesn't really make much sense because now the only solution left without a diplomatic solution to this standoff is simply for Russia to have to rely on its military to prevent further NATO expansion.
All right, you guys. This is from New York Prepper. This says World War III alert. Massive movement of tanks and equipment in Russia today after peace talks fail. So let's take a look at this, y'all. And there is no sound to this, but this is apparently the movement that is happening. And thank you so very much, New York Prepper, for sharing this with us. Massive, you guys, massive. Wow. Just keeps going and going, you guys. Yeah, it doesn't look like peace talks really took. So anyways, I just wanted to leave you with this. We are still looking at NATO giving permission to not only Ukraine, but to Georgia and Sweden, and I think one other country. And, well, Russia's not going to have that, y'all. Anyways, y'all have a blessed day. Let's keep looking up, because when NATO gives permission, that's it. And perhaps even before that.